Okay, welcome everybody to this emergency meeting of the Purple Flag Network. We will be discussing managing protest in a fractured community. And I think most people will know exactly why this conversation is important, because we know right now there is some major tension for a lot of major centres, which is linked to world events which are largely out of our control. This is London just this weekend gone, where 300,000 people held a big march, a big rally in the centre of the capital city for the UK. And we know that this is linked to the conflict that is currently ongoing across Israel and Gaza, which brings with it some really strong emotions and views on each side, which leads to challenges we have to manage in our towns and cities. Not just about London, not just about the UK. This is a global problem. At the same time as the big marches were happening in London, there were also thousands of people on the street in Dublin. This is O'Connell Street, where there was a significant march happening. It was the same issue. And indeed, when we talk about global concern, we do mean global. In fact, the first time we came across the issue of the pro-Palestinian rallies was in a place called Lakemba, which for many of our network in the UK and Ireland, you might not have heard of Lakemba before. It is a district in Sydney, which is one of the newest additions to the Purple Flag Network. It happened to be one of the first places to host a rally. And this rally received worldwide news coverage, was the subject of conversation, almost criticism, from the Australian Prime Minister for high-profile political figures within Australia, and also captured worldwide media attention through the likes of New York Times, ABC in Australia, which is a sister network to the BBC. And it's been a real challenge. Lakemba especially faced criticism from those who felt threatened by the marches, an experience which seems to now tally with the UK as well in terms of some of the trends that are happening. So in the UK, we know that within a week of the attacks happening in Israel, the Community Security Trust and the Met Police have both recorded spikes in terms of incidents of anti-Semitism, something which has only continued to grow, which has people understandably concerned. And this polarization seems to be underlined by the escalation of potential challenges which come with managing these rallies. So along with the rallies now, there is this counter-protest. So last weekend in London, the big rally, which had been talked about for some time, which brought out 300,000 people, was then also a draw for a smaller counter-protest, which has ramped up tension and also increased concern for many as well, especially from the involvement from the far right, and also now the rise of Islamophobia alongside that rise in anti-Semitism. So all of a sudden, we're looking at something which becomes really difficult to manage. And it becomes a particular challenge for anybody who is in the business, like we are, of creating safe spaces and places for people to spend their time and enjoy their town centres. And let's be honest, this becomes a real challenge for the business community, because all of this happens at a time which ultimately is not ideal. We are in the golden quarter, we're in the run up to Christmas. We are in a time which should be most profitable for those businesses in our town centres. We know for a fact that retail sales are struggling, and they're struggling for a specific reason. It's things like the cost of living pressures, which, although inflation might be slowly coming down, it is still a challenge. We know, especially across the UK and Ireland, we've had specifically some quite bad weather with a number of storms hitting one after another. And that's become a real challenge. So retail sales so far this quarter are lagging behind what was experienced last year, which is a real problem. And then bad news really keeps coming for town centres. So yesterday we had the announcement of yet more train strikes coming in December in the UK, which will further impact trade. And this morning, a news story, which is probably even more relevant than that of train strikes, and that is that not only will the marches continue, but for the UK specifically, the big march which happened in London, that type of big march for the immediate future is not going to take place. Again, instead, what will happen is that activity will disperse to towns across the UK. So lots of smaller activities. The Guardian is reporting in the region of around 100 pro-Palestinian events demanding a ceasefire in Gaza due to take place this weekend. So this is a live issue. This is something which a lot of our network is going to need to understand and prepare for going forward. So what we are meeting about today, what we are asking today is how can the place management industry enable people and businesses to safely use their town centres despite the ongoing protests. So for those of a UK audience, just to let you know, there is some funding out there, not necessarily a lot, but there is some for funding out there for specific things. So protective security schemes for places of worship in both England and Wales is open. It's available again. The deadline for this is the 26th of November. So that's just over 1 week away. And then the Community Security Trust is providing funding. This is UK wide, and that's for Jewish sites to keep Jewish communities safe. So please take a look if you have places of worship in your area, then do take a look at those options for funding. However, what we're going to do now is we're going to learn about some of the experiences of managing protests within a fractured community. And for this, we're going to be learning from City Centre Initiative in Derry-Londonderry, who historically have done some great work around this particular issue. So what I'm going to do is in just a second, I'm going to hand over to Jim and Kira to explain more. And just finally to say, so why Purple Flag? When we know this is an issue that impacts both day and nighttime economy, well, the reason why we are looking at Purple Flag destinations at this issue is because so many of our Purple Flag destinations have to rely heavily on exactly the types of partnerships that I think will be key to allowing us to overcome the challenge of being able to manage some of the challenges we have. That doesn't necessarily mean it's only Purple Flag destinations that can learn from these experiences. Far from it. The learnings which will be on display here are available to everyone. But I think it's no coincidence that the guys I'm about to introduce you to now are, I have to say, one of our best Purple Flag destinations for some of the work they do around well-being, safety, security, etc., and the partnerships they leverage. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce everybody to City Centre Initiative Derry-Londonderry. Jim, Kira, thanks a lot for doing this. Can I just start by asking, because it's occurred to me that there's probably some now across our network who are probably even too young to have a decent knowledge of the troubles in Northern Ireland and the context with which you speak. So, Jim, when you start, can I ask you to give just a little bit of context as to what Derry-Londonderry has faced in previous years before we go into some of the details? And also, I think that message probably is pertinent for those outside of the UK and Ireland network. Like I say, we've got Purple Flag destinations across the world. So there may be some people out there who don't necessarily have that context and know why Northern Ireland actually provides a really good case study for understanding how we can overcome some of the challenges we have. So Jim, can I bring you in?
So thanks so much, OJ, for that introduction. And I think the latter part of the Purple Flag slide is probably the most important part, what role can town and city centre management companies or bids actually play as we move forward. But just as you've asked, to set the context for the knowledge that we've learned over the years. In 1969, the conflict in Northern Ireland really became on the stage. There have been issues prior to 1969, but in 1969, during an Apprentice Boys of Derry parade in my own city, Derry-Londonderry, violence broke out, which led to 3 days and 3 nights of street violence. Community order broke down totally, and the troops were sent on the streets of our city and indeed the cities throughout Northern Ireland, and they remained here until the conflict ended and a peace was signed. Conflict ended in 1998 when peace was signed. So basically, the catalyst to the main fulcrum of trouble was a parade, which was very contentious, and right throughout the difficulties we've had when there's been over 3,500 deaths on our streets here on a very small area, parades, protests, policing, and prisons were the real issues. There was always issues around parades. There was always issues around protesting. There's always been issues around the policing and around prisons. So they've been the main fulcrum. But today, OJ, I want to talk about parades because we recognise very succinctly the difficulties that are facing town and city centres at this moment in time. Our town and city centres realistically should be partnerships. They should be safe spaces, and they should be a place where we, in a non-judgmental way, assist partners, all partners, to live life as normally as they can. And even in these difficult times, that includes police, local government, paraders and protesters, traders, and any other city centre stakeholder you wish to think of. There's so much media attention that's been brought on to this issue now. It's our news headlines every night. It's very, very emotive. And there are people who would have very many different thoughts and feelings about what's going on. But it is engendering a major wave of parading and protesting that, if dealt with in the wrong manner, will have an effect as to how all of our partners do their business. We've witnessed issues here around parading where we may have sorted out the issues before the parade took place, but we may have a media headline that talks of tension prior to a parade. The first thing that does, it drives footfall away from the city centre or the town centre. It stops families coming out and enjoying their town and city centres, and the net effect of that is it lowers the opportunity to trade for traders and cause all sorts of difficulties. And that may not necessarily just be what happens in your own town or village or your own city. What we've seen from London can have a ripple effect right throughout the UK and Ireland and elsewhere. There could be tension about what a politician has said. There could be protests. There could be any violence. And if that similar type protest and parades coming to your area the next week, you'll automatically think, or the media will automatically think, or the traders will automatically think that that's going to be followed with the same tension and the same hype that can cause all sorts of damage to, as you explained, OJ, an already difficult trading environment. So we have to be very careful of the role that we play, and our role is so vitally important in this. The media attention that can be brought to this can damage everything that we do if it's negative media attention, or if indeed it's one of these headlines, it's, trouble expected at tomorrow's parade, or protesters coming in from outside the area. All the things that engender fear, it's going to lead to a drop-off of footfall. The negative political commentary as well, not only engenders fear and worry amongst, the traders and the people who come into trade, but also engenders fear and worry with the paraders, indeed, and indeed with protesters who wish to protest against the parades. So what do we see our aim as? City Centre Initiative in our city, when it comes to protests and parades, is seen as a safe space, a non-judgmental space. As long as people work within the law and operate within the law, then we should be there to help make things go on as normal. We should be there to help ensure that parading takes place without fear or favour. Protesting can take place without fear or favour. But what we also should be doing is making sure that our traders get the support and the help that they require. And how do we do this? So we have a parade coming up here on the 2nd of December. It's a cultural parade, but yet it's been a parade that's been bedeviled with violence year on year up until about 10 years ago when we actually got on top of this. Now, this is a small parade for us. There'll be about 3,000 paraders and maybe about 40 bands. The parade will probably take about, 50, 60 odd minutes to get past any one given point. But it goes around the city centre for about 3 hours, and it finishes off, it culminates in the burning of an effigy in the city centre environment. And a lot of people see that as tribal and see that as fearful, but it is somebody's culture. So we used to have protests around this, and as I say, it used to lead to violence. So City Centre Initiative became the fulcrum of discussion. We would have sat with the paraders, and we would have obviously expected of them to adhere to all the event management procedures that they should adhere to. Have an organised parade, have a parade within the law, be respectful of everything that's going on around you, and also all the stakeholders in our city. Absolutely right to celebrate your culture, or indeed protest against your grievances. No issue with that whatsoever. But let's make sure that all the different organs of the city centre work well in conjunction with you doing it. At the end of the day, for a lot of the people who take part in these protests or these parades, it's their own kith and kin who work in these shops, in these restaurants, and in these businesses. And it's in their interest to make sure that this goes off well. And, it's also in their interest to ensure that their area is thriving. And if it gets a name of a place where violence might occur, then that has a knock-on effect, not only for City Centre, but for every sort of investment that the area may need to keep people in employment. So it's vitally important that everybody buys into the concept that working within the law is good, but it must be done in a managed and respectful way. And if you do organise a parade or a protest, which is your right, with those rights come responsibilities, and people need to be held to those responsibilities as well. Now, that can't be done in an adversarial way. It has to be done in a way that people are there to understand we're there to help each other, no matter what your grievance or your protest is, or no matter what you're trying to highlight. We should be there to help. Our aim would always be to keep the city centre safe, vibrant, and open to business. And I think that's what all our aims should be. But it also allows for the other stakeholders to use our streets to get their message across, and that should be okay as well. And indeed, when people are parading and protesting, they should be able to avail of the shops, of the cafes, and once their protest or parade is over, get back to normal life. You've highlighted your message, utilise the shops that are open to do trade and enjoy what we're trying to provide, a safe, vibrant city centre. Again, this can't be done without working with your local authority, and in particular, your police, the police service, the police force. So again, it's vitally important using the partnerships that we have, that we invite the police into the discussion as well. So when we have a parade in the city, I would meet with the police commanders, and I would work with the operation planners, how they're going to do their operation around the parade itself. They would utilise the knowledge that we have as a form of intelligence as to how they do that policing operation. If it's a very heavy-handed policing operation, it can drive people away from your town and city centres. If it's a policing operation without empathy to other paraders or protesters, it can create interfaces that cause trouble or violence, which again will drive people away. So it's vitally important that we work with our police as well, and indeed they work with us. What we have found in Derry-Londonderry, that the police welcome our space as the safe space, as the space where they can walk into. It's totally neutral. They can learn some cultural intelligence and emotional intelligence about what's actually happening. Remember, we're dealing with young boys and girls who are being commanded from on high, and again, not to be judgmental, but if you can imagine London last week, where you have a senior politician actually interfacing with the police in a very public way and actually accusing the police of double-tier policing, that causes major issues. So we need to speak to your politicians as well. And whilst everybody's entitled to their point of view and very healthy or strongly held point of view, what we want them to do is understand that the space that we operate is well being used for parading or protesting, but it also must be used for our ordinary everyday business, and nothing can harm that whatsoever. So what I would appeal to other town and city centre management companies or bids is get yourself in there, allow your space to be used as a safe space, become a fulcrum of the discussion, do it in a non-judgmental way, earn the trust of all the people who you're working with, and for most of you that will already be there, but use that in a strong way as a force for good. You know, community will buy in, they will get behind you, and you know, insist that the police, and this won't be difficult, that they do use your offices as a way of getting information out to traders, working with traders, but also as a way of feeding back information when they get it wrong, that they be called out as well. Now, there's a lot of emotion around all of this. You know, it's easy to go home at night and sit and watch TV and switch off. But when you're watching TV and you're seeing people, you know, being slaughtered from one side or the other, and people are then out being very angry in the streets, and you're trying to hold a neutral line and all of that, sometimes it can be a lonely place. But your traders, the people who are trying to work your economy, both daytime and nighttime, need somebody to be creating that safe space for them to keep their trading. You will be thanked by the rest of your community for ensuring that your town and city centres, indeed your villages, remain safe, remain well policed, and indeed your politicians will thank you at the end of it. But everybody plays a vital component part, and they must feed into some sort of fulcrum, some sort of organisation that creates that safe space, that all these plans can be drawn up and signed off on. And when something goes wrong, the people can be properly held to account, so that when these occurrences happen again, we learn by our mistakes. Now, we've been doing this since 1996. Town centre management got involved in the negotiations and parading in our city. And every parade we had in our city up until that time ended up in riots. Sometimes ended up people being killed in our streets. And I kid you not, it was that bad at times. Whereas now, our main parade in the city centre every August would have at least 15,000 paraders on it with 150 bands. This would have been seen as a majorly contentious parade down through the years. But because of that safe space that has been created, because of the dialogue and the understanding, and because we've got the community to buy in behind us and the police to work with us, those parades now pass off peacefully. In 2010, we done an audit, because it was still controversial at that time. We done an audit of our trading, and our trading would have been 15% of a normal Saturday. In fact, it used to get that bad. The protesters who were at the side of the parade, spit barriers were erected, very unsightly spit barriers, because people spat upon each other, and the police devised this way of keeping people apart. We now don't have any barriers. Our trading's up to about 98% of a normal Saturday. So we're almost back where we should be. It's taken years of learning, and every day is a learning day. And we deal with different personalities at all times. The policing command changes at all times. The organisers of parades and protests changes at all times. But the template of which we work does not change. And it's all about dialogue in the safe space that as a city centre management company we create. And that safe space is for everybody, as long as people act within the law. And all that we asked of them when they carry out their parades or protests is that they use the right to do that wisely, and they respect everybody else that needs to operate and are very safe and hopefully vibrant city centres. OJ, that's just a general overview. There are probably lots of queries and questions, and this journey hasn't been easy for us, and And there's lots of more things that I could say. There's lots of case studies that I could use, but that's a generic overview. And now when we have parades and protests in our cities, we don't have any violence associated with them, and it allows the rest of the city centre to operate normally, but allows people also to exercise their rights when they come to parade or protest.
Jim, it's such valuable learning. It really is, especially at this difficult time. So creating a non-judgmental, safe space, having that dialogue with all stakeholders, allowing people to have their say at parades, protests, etc., but making sure those people doing whatever it is that march, they know the rules of the game, and they know that they have to make sure that there are other stakeholders using that same space who have a right to use that same space. Traders have the right to trade, etc. And so that almost the normal function of the town centre has to be able to continue despite that that protest or that parade. I think that's all really valuable. I've got a couple of questions for you, and for those people on the webinar as well. If you've got a question for Jim or Kira, please feel free to type it into the chat box or the Q&A section, and I will bring you in. So firstly, Jim, I think it sounds now like you're such an important part of the functioning of some of the parades that you are automatically going to be at the top of the list for the stakeholders the police would need to talk to in terms of organisation. Presumably, was that different at the beginning of the journey? Was there some difficulty in terms of first being able to build that relationship with the police? And if so, do you know what techniques were used to try and support that conversation?
Yeah, so OJ, look, it became very clear very quickly. The police are in a no-win situation here. We've seen that in London last week. They need allies, and ordinarily most of us walk away and allow the police to get on with it. But for us to expect the police to take on everybody's concerns, all our concerns, the paraders, the protesters, the traders, all the other city centre stakeholders, and expect them to simply be able to police that without assistance it's not possible to do that. So we found the police very, very much welcoming our input, and I would say if you spoke to a police commander now in our city, right from their operation, right from the parade is notified and their operational planning, right through to the discussions with the paraders or the protesters, we would host all of those meetings, and we would be the fulcrum for all of those meetings. So all the stakeholders, including police, would look to us. So far as, sometimes when people were coming towards our city centre and they've seen some heavy policing, lots of police officers around, and they listen on the news, there's going to be a parade or protest, that's enough to stop the car and turn and go around, head off somewhere else, out of town shopping areas, whatever, do their shopping elsewhere. That could happen week after week, and all of a sudden people stay away. So we noticed that sometimes heavy-handed policing, even though it was just having the resources and the feet on the ground in case something went wrong, which we know they need to do, but sometimes that was enough just to turn people away. So we devised ideas like loading bays in some of our shopping centres in the city centre. Took the police away in there. If things do get difficult, bring them out as and when you need them. Just have them close by, but don't have them out that's going to cause fear or worry amongst those people who are coming to trade, and act as a normal day around their city centre. So there's small issues like that. We also manage CCTV in the city, and we do it as an independent body. So we really provide the links for the police. I would be on duty every single day during every one of these parades, and I would be on the ground. There would be very few decisions that a police commander would take without lifting the phone and saying, this is what we're considering doing, what's your viewpoint? And it may be, this is what we're considering doing, unless the protesters do this or do that. At which time I could speak to the leader of the protest and say, look, could you just change what you're doing slightly, and we'll keep the police in the background. Most times that works. So it's about creating that pathway of decision making that includes all the needs of the city centre. And it's not, I'm not being disrespectful to the police, but it's not just policing taking a decision for policing's sake, but taking decisions that it best suits the needs of all aspects of our city centre life. And to be fair to our police, they work very, very closely with us on that. What I would suggest is, for a lot of the town and city centres that these protests and parades are happening, this is quite new for some of the commanders. They mightn't all have the same sort of emotional or cultural intelligence around making those decisions. And it's vitally important that we as town and city centre managers get in there, get into them, tell them we need them to work with us as much as they need us to work with them. But yet we can be such an organ for good for them. We can actually help them do their job and help them make the appropriate decisions. So in general, I found policing pivotal to what we do. Without them, if they were taking their own decisions in a bubble, then our life would be very, very difficult. But they don't do that. They see the value in what we bring to it.
That's really interesting. And then you mentioned something in there about making sure that key stakeholders, especially the police, are just able to dial down the temperature so people understand it can just be a normal day for the town centre. And certainly one of the things we saw with Remembrance sort of last weekend across Great Britain, there was I can't remember how many national newspapers it was, but there was an incident in Edinburgh, which I believe made the front page of some of the nationals. And it turned out that maybe not everything was as it seemed in terms of that particular story, but it did stoke up some tensions and some concerns for people who otherwise would have been out and about as normal for that weekend. Is there a case for us as an industry to be working positively with the media as well, to be looking at how we can just dial down some of those tensions?
So I think advocacy is a very important word in all of this. Being an advocate for people working within the law, but yet expressing their views in a lawful manner. Being an advocate for police, where people are very uncertain, what the role of police are in all of this, and just even overnight and early this morning, watching the whole debate about people claiming on to the War Memorial. I can't remember where it was, but the range of different attitudes from senior politicians who should know better, right down to ordinary commentators about what the police should or should not do around that. People have this idea if it's morally wrong, the police should be in heavy-handed doing certain things. But police also have major oversight over them as well, and they have to work within the law. If it's not breaking the law for people to do some things, even though it may seem abhorrent to the rest of us, we must respect that the police have to work in a certain way. Now, that might be difficult to stand back and watch it when your heart's telling you, why don't you just get in and get involved and stop them doing that? But the police have to work within the law. So sometimes we would be used in a very positive way to get messages out to people who are so annoyed and so uptight about what's going on, and they see things behave in a way that's abhorrent to them. They just don't understand why it's just not sorted out or dealt with. It's not always as easy as that. Police can only really intervene when somebody is acting unlawfully, and if they're not acting unlawfully, it's very, very difficult. They may be acting in a way that we find extremely immoral, but we need to be advocates for each other, because sometimes an action can bring a reaction that can make things much worse. And it's about being calm. If somebody does something wrong, it might be that I would go over to somebody if they dared climb on the War Memorial here in the city and say to them, guys, you really realise what you are doing here? As opposed to the police going to do it as well. So look, it's about common sense a lot of the time, but it's also knowing about what people can do and what they can't do. And within the law, there's a lot the police can do, but the worst thing that they could do is use the law in a way just to get the means to an end. The law should be there to help guide us. It shouldn't be twisted or tweeted to try and help us get the means to an end. So if people do things immorally, call it out for what it is. It's an immoral act. It might not be an unlawful act. It might be distasteful. But there's ways of isolating people who do those things. And I'm sure most of the people who either parade or protest would actually support organisations like Town and City Centre Management calling things out in a very much advocational way as opposed to being an adversarial way.
Really interesting. And I guess over time, CCI has almost evolved because of the nature of the parade. So in terms of supporting, especially some of the more contentious parades, you might be better set up for it than some of our members going into this weekend who might have something occur on their doorstep which they're not set up for, they're not prepared for, and are sort of coming at this really cold. How much, can you give an indication of how much on the day of any one parade, how much operational support you will provide during the day, or is all the work done beforehand in terms of conversations with the different stakeholders, and then on the day CCI takes a step back and lets things happen, or are you much more involved in that operational stuff on the day itself?
So 90% of our work will be done in the lead up to the actual parade and day. However, because we've been the safe space, because we've chaired the meetings, there may be operational issues that happen on the day that we may have to intervene with. If I witnessed the police having lots of boots on a street corner where they agreed they wouldn't have boots on a street corner, I would make a call to the area commander or the district commander and say, guys, this is against what you said you would do. Everybody is in agreement. What we agreed, can you please pull back? And you know what? This could be down to lack of communication within the policing ranks, and that's why it may have happened. And just to be able to be that safety net that can call it out, and again, likewise, with protesters or with paraders, if you build up that rapport with the paraders, for argument's sake, and then some people break away from the parade and do things that people generally find distasteful, it's easy to make a phone call to the person who's organised the parade and say, listen, remember what we agreed here? Could you keep a wee eye on this, or could you ask your stewards to intervene? And to be able to convey that back to the police that you've done that, to be able to convey to the protesters that you've spoken to the police, if the police have made mistakes, to really talk to the paraders, in the same fashion. We're used as a conduit on the day more than anything else. Operationally, we wouldn't have any decision making to do, nor would we through the whole thing. We'd be more just, a safe space for those decisions to be agreed. But when things go wrong on the day, there's absolutely no doubt the phones will be ringing. Can you sort this out for me? Can you sort that out for me? Can you sort the other out? But that doesn't mean our intervention on the ground. It means by making the calls and asking people to adhere to the promises they've made in the meetings that lead up to these parades or protests.
Yeah, really, really valuable learning there. And one more question from me, I think. So we talk about again, that challenge of taking the heat out of the situation, and the need for, whether it's our political leaders to be responsible, police to be responsible, all the stakeholders to be responsible in taking the heat out of the situation. Have you noticed any new challenges in terms of that task because of the emergence of social media and what some people see as issues such as misinformation, or possibly even a greater polarization of views, which almost lead to greater conflict between people of different opinions? Is that something which has come on your radar, or do you think there's been no real perceptible difference?
So social media can be so damaging in all of this. People can be very selective with social media. Remembering this, it's just like any other camera. It's only looking one way. Nobody sees what's going on behind. Nobody sees provocation. Nobody sees everything else. And it's easy to highlight, one or two issues amongst a crowd of maybe anything between a couple of hundred to 10 or 15,000. But in general terms, as long as you've done your preparations, OJ, as long as you've worked with all the stakeholders, as long as you can do your proper debriefs and speak to each other as well, you can usually dampen the damage that social media can do. But there's absolutely no doubt you can't stop it at the point that it goes live, but you may be able to deal with it afterwards. But it can be very difficult. And again, as part of the debrief, if the social media, for argument's sake, of police officers being heavy-handed, that's caused an escalation of any difficulties on the ground, you know, there's no issues afterwards sitting down and trying to understand what actually happened here, and using social media in a positive way. But unfortunately, too many of us try to use it in a social way. Too many of us try to use it to get our point across. But back to what I said at the very beginning, it's about us being non-judgmental. It's about us being that safe space. And trust me, guys, it can be a very lonely space at times. Very, very lonely space at times. It can be very downheartening at times. You know, if something goes wrong during the parade and the paraders don't answer their phones, or they do go into hiding for a while, or if something happens in the middle of a protest and they know that they've done wrong and they back off for a period of time, you know, you almost feel as though you want to call them to account and point the finger and blame. And there might be a short-term win out of that. You might be able to stop the debate around that particular issue, but it also might mean that you might break down relations. And the most important thing that we can do is have our door open to all the different people who are involved in this, and making sure that relationships stay strong and trust stays strong. And trust is very difficult to earn, but very easy to lose. So instead of knee-jerking or reacting, and like I have no doubt that this goes on, we'll have town and city centre managers out observing the protests, observing the parades, observing the police. It's easy for local media who know our city and town centre managers to stick a microphone under your mouth. I would urge, say nothing until the day is over, because you could say something at one point in the day that might set the tone for the rest of the day, and that then brings you into the problem. You become part of the problem, whereas really we need to be part of the solution. And just please hold your counsel, and probably not even go near the media unless you desperately have to, but only do it when you're in charge of the full facts and understand everybody's position. Doing it prior to that could maybe add to the problems that are happening on the streets.
That's such valuable information, Jim. Thank you very much for that. For those people listening live, and for those people who are going to join us at a later date, watching this back on demand on YouTube, put this in your diary. 30th of November, we're probably going to have a part 2 to this, where we discuss this in more detail and have a proper Q&A session. So recording will be made available shortly. So Jim will coordinate on this and get something set up and out there. Can I just say once again, thank you for this really important insight. So we'll make sure we get this shared across our Purple Flag network.
And OJ, if I could just say one thing, one of the police officers who worked with me here is now the Chief Constable of Staffordshire, and I just found out yesterday that he is the UK lead, or the GB lead for policing protests. He's a guy called Chris Noble, and when I told him about our conversations, he said that he would be delighted to make himself available along with me to come on and talk about the work that we've done, and the work that the knowledge that he's bringing to policing these protests and parades within GB. He would be available between 12 and 2 on the date that you'd suggested. I think it was the 30th, and I think that would be a really useful exercise, because Chris is extremely experienced. And I think you'll see from the conversations that we've had, you know, there is a massive degree of advocacy built through trust, through hard discussions at times. Like, you know, this trust wasn't built by great loved-ones in very difficult scenarios. There are times in a room where you call each other out and you have really, really difficult discussions. But you know what? That works. And the most important thing is what people see on the ground, what people see in the street, what traders see they allow them to do business, what all the evening time revelers come in to see peaceful and nice city centres that might have had tens of thousands of people in it a few hours before it. That's where it works when people see the outcome of that. So it'd be great if Chris could join us that day as well, Jay, and thank you so much for this opportunity.
I would absolutely welcome Chris onto a call with us. I think that will be really valuable for everybody involved. So yeah, I can't thank you enough for that, Jim. That's brilliant. Jim, Kira, thank you very much. People watching either live or recorded, thanks for tuning in, and we'll make sure we get more details out about the next meeting as soon as we can. Thanks all.